The story of Hansel and Gretel, origins of the tale. Hansel and Gretel is a famous German fairy tale collected and popularized by the Brothers Grimm, Jacob and Wilhelm, in their collection of stories, Grimm's Fairy Tales, first published in 1812. While the Grimms didn't invent the tale, they preserved it from oral tradition, adding their own embellishments. The story is believed to have ancient roots, possibly originating in times of famine, when abandonment of children was not unheard of in extreme circumstances. The tale fits into the category of European folk tales that often contain themes of survival, the cunning of children, and a focus on the dangers of the wilderness. It is one of the most well-known stories in Western culture, frequently adapted for books, films, and other media. The story of Hansel and Gretel. Once upon a time, a poor woodcutter lived at the edge of a large, dark forest with his wife and 2 children. The boy was named Hansel, and the girl was called Gretel. They were a humble family, but times were hard, and there was a famine throughout the land. The woodcutter could barely provide enough food to feed his family, and with each passing day, their situation grew worse. One night, as the woodcutter lay in bed, his wife whispered to him, "We have no more bread. How will we feed the children? Tomorrow, we must take them into the forest and leave them there. They will never find their way back, and we will be rid of them." The woodcutter was horrified at the idea. "I cannot do that," he said. "How could I abandon my own children in the forest, where wild animals would devour them?" But his wife, who was their stepmother, persisted, and eventually, out of desperation, he agreed. However, Hansel and Gretel had not been asleep. They heard everything their stepmother said. Gretel wept bitterly, but Hansel comforted her. "Don't cry, little sister," he said. "I have a plan." When their parents had fallen asleep, Hansel sneaked outside and gathered as many small white pebbles as he could find, putting them into his pocket. Then he returned to bed. The next morning, the stepmother woke Hansel and Gretel early and told them to get ready for a walk in the forest. The children were given a small piece of bread, but it wasn't enough to fill their hungry bellies. As they walked deeper into the forest, Hansel secretly dropped the white pebbles along the path, marking their way. When they reached the heart of the forest, the stepmother and the woodcutter lit a fire for the children. "Rest here," they said, "while we go and cut some wood. We'll come back for you soon." But hours passed, and Hansel and Gretel knew their parents weren't coming back. As night fell and the moon rose in the sky, Hansel took Gretel's hand. "Don't be afraid," he said. "The moon will light our way." The white pebbles shone brightly in the moonlight, and the children followed them all the way back home. When they arrived, their father was overjoyed to see them. He had been filled with guilt and sorrow, but their stepmother was not pleased. Once again, food grew scarce, and the stepmother devised a second plan. "We must take the children farther into the forest this time, so they cannot find their way home." Once again, Hansel and Gretel overheard their stepmother's plan. This time, when Hansel went to collect pebbles, he found that the door had been locked. He could not go outside, but he reassured Gretel that they would still find a way. The next morning, the stepmother gave them a small piece of bread, and as they walked through the forest, Hansel crumbled the bread in his pocket and dropped the crumbs along the path. But when night fell, and the children tried to follow the trail of crumbs, they discovered that birds had eaten every last piece. Lost and frightened, Hansel and Gretel wandered deeper into the forest. After 3 days of walking, they were tired, hungry, and scared. But just as they were about to give up hope, they saw a strange and wonderful sight: a little house made entirely of candy, with a roof of gingerbread and windows of sugar. Overcome with hunger, the children ran to the house and began to eat. Hansel broke off a piece of the roof, and Gretel nibbled at the windows. As they feasted, a voice called from inside, "Nibble, nibble, little mouse, who is nibbling at my house?" The door of the candy house creaked open, and out came an old woman, leaning on a cane. She smiled sweetly at the children. "Dear ones," she said, "come inside. You must be hungry and tired. I have plenty of food, and you may rest here." Hansel and Gretel, though cautious, were too hungry to refuse. They followed the old woman into the house, where she set a feast before them: pancakes, apples, nuts, and milk. After they ate, the woman showed them to 2 cozy little beds, where they soon fell asleep. But the old woman was not as kind as she seemed. She was a wicked witch who had built her house to lure children. When they were plump enough, she planned to eat them. The next morning, the witch dragged Hansel from his bed and locked him in a cage. Then she forced Gretel to cook and clean for her. "Fatten him up," she commanded, "and when he is ready, I will feast upon him." Every day, the witch checked on Hansel. "Stick out your finger," she would say, to see if he was plump enough to eat. But clever Hansel tricked her. Instead of his finger, he stuck out a thin bone, and the witch, who had poor eyesight, believed he was still too thin. Weeks passed, and the witch grew impatient. "I cannot wait any longer," she said to Gretel. "Heat the oven. Today, I will eat your brother." Gretel was terrified, but she had to think quickly. "I don't know how to use the oven," she lied. "Could you show me?" The witch, eager to eat, opened the oven door and leaned inside to show Gretel how to light the fire. At that moment, Gretel gave her a hard shove, and the witch tumbled into the oven. Quickly, Gretel slammed the door shut and bolted it. Hansel and Gretel were free. They searched the witch's house and found chests full of gold and jewels. Filling their pockets, they left the candy house behind and began the long journey home. After many days, they finally found their way out of the forest. When they reached home, their father welcomed them with open arms. He had been heartbroken over their disappearance and was overjoyed to see them again. Their stepmother had died in the meantime, and they lived happily ever after, never wanting for food again, for the treasure they brought with them was more than enough to ensure they would never be hungry again. Thus, Hansel and Gretel lived happily with their father, and they never feared the forest again. Themes and lessons. The story of Hansel and Gretel is filled with themes of survival, cunning, and family bonds. The children outwit both their wicked stepmother and the evil witch, demonstrating that even in the darkest of circumstances, cleverness and bravery can lead to a happy ending. It is also a tale about hope and resilience, as Hansel and Gretel never give up, even when faced with the gravest of dangers. The story continues to be told and adapted, resonating with audiences of all ages, as it reminds us of the strength of the human spirit, especially in the face of adversity.